Welcome to the Canadian Business Quarterly Podcast, where we speak with Canada's most influential industry leaders on the business and economic development issues taking place across the country. You can stay up to date with all of our content, including our publications, newsletters, and podcasts by visiting www.thecbq.ca and clicking on subscribe.
Today's guest is Dr. Elliot Goldstein, CEO of ProMIS Neurosciences, a Toronto-headquartered biotech with U.S. offices in San Francisco and Cambridge. ProMIS is on track to help deliver radical improvement to the lives of those suffering from Alzheimer's, ALS, and Parkinson's disease, which affect millions and are currently without effective therapies. Dr. Goldstein has more than 35 years' experience bringing new medicines to patients, particularly for diseases with no therapies. While he currently lives abroad, his roots are deeply Canadian. He grew up in Montreal, studied genetics at McGill, and remains a Canadian citizen. Elliot, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be with you today.
As our introduction mentions, the goal of your company ProMIS is to provide solutions to the diseases of Alzheimer's, ALS, and Parkinson's. Could you give us an understanding of how they are related to one another?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and ALS, also called Lou Gehrig's disease, are all so-called neurodegenerative diseases, which simply means they are due to the death of neurons in different parts of the brain, leading to different symptoms. The commonality as well is that these diseases all have no treatment today to affect the root cause. Let's take a quick look, though, at the largest of these, Alzheimer's disease, which affects 47 million people worldwide. It's expected to increase significantly, this prevalence, due to baby boomers aging, of course. And there's no cure for Alzheimer's disease, like there are no cure for the other neurodegenerative diseases I mentioned. With Alzheimer's, it's the greatest area of unmet need in medicine today. So at ProMIS, we're developing new medicines that target the root cause of Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases, like Parkinson's and ALS, because they also share a similar root cause. We're incredibly excited at this time to be involved in helping find medicines that truly address the underlying cause of these terrible diseases and not just offering mild symptomatic improvement. This is the passion and focus of ProMIS.
Okay. So how educated are we at this point in time about their causes, and how is ProMIS contributing towards finding a solution?
Yeah, this is a great question because the field has suffered in a sense over the last 2 decades or so, because for years, researchers, clinicians, experts in the field have thought that plaque, we've all heard about plaque, amyloid plaque, have all thought that plaque killed brain cells and was the original cause, the originating cause or root cause of Alzheimer's disease. However, after almost 2 decades of research and clinical trials, we haven't seen yet, or this hasn't produced, a single medicine that attacks the fundamental driver of Alzheimer's and these other diseases. This has been very disappointing for the community that currently has no available disease-modifying therapy for Alzheimer's. But what's really exciting, we've learned so much from all of the scientific research from labs all around the world, quite frankly, and the results of these clinical trials, including the failures. They've given us great clarity on the root cause of Alzheimer's. Again, for years, the community thought it was plaque, and we were all wrong. This has caused a major shift, a paradigm shift in the focus of drug development. And hundreds of published studies now convincingly show it's a bad actor called the toxic oligomer that is the root cause of this terrible brain-wasting disease, not the plaque. This really offers a lot of hope because now that we know what the root cause or root driver is, we can potentially, and certainly at ProMIS, that's our priority, focus on developing drugs that selectively target this root cause.
So if we have this new understanding of the root causes of Alzheimer's now, what does this do to be able to advance research in the field?
Oh, in many ways. You know, as I said before, it's an exciting time for ProMIS and others to be creating medicines for these terrible diseases. And for the first time, we know exactly what we're aiming at, what we need to target, as I mentioned before. So we believe that medicines, if we can develop medicines, we work on antibody therapies, but we can develop medicines, will have a real impact on the root cause. This is really an important development for us. And that's what we're doing at ProMIS. We've already done numerous scientific studies in our lab and with outside labs, etc., that show that our lead drug candidate, it's an antibody with a code name PMN 310. These studies have shown that it actually works. It does what we anticipate. In essence, our early data show that PMN 310 selectively targets and binds to the toxic oligomer, thereby neutralizing this bad actor and stopping the death of brain cells. So we're really excited and hopeful based on these emerging results with our lead program for Alzheimer's.
Okay. And do we have any sort of numbers? I mean, you briefly touched on, globally we've got a further aging population. Do we roughly know how many sufferers of Alzheimer's there would be in Canada and across the globe?
Yeah, well, across the globe, it's about 47 million. In the United States, about 5 million diagnosed with the disease, and there's about a tenth of that in Canada, just based on the population. So, say 500,000 people, almost the size of Vancouver. Think about it. Half of the city of Vancouver with diagnosed, clinically evident Alzheimer's disease. In addition, what makes this more challenging, let's take the U.S. statistics because they're the most developed. In addition to the 5 million people with diagnosed Alzheimer's disease, there's another 15 million right behind who are developing it. But because these toxic oligomers kill neurons are brain cells, because these toxic oligomers kill neurons in a very slow and progressive way, it takes on average about 15 years or so from when this phenomenon first starts to actually getting the first symptoms. So there are really over 20 million either current sufferers or potential sufferers in the near future in the United States, and then you can extrapolate that out to Canada and the rest of the world. So the big obstacle here, of course, is just the population, and it's anticipated that over the coming 3 or 4 decades, just in the United States, again, because the statistics are very good, the indirect and direct medical costs of the disease will triple, multiply by 3 from $500 billion annually currently to well over $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion, bankrupting our healthcare system. So that's a real challenge, and we need to address the root cause so we can remove this challenge. If not, it's going to be it's a disastrous epidemic.
Now, from what you're telling me, at least my understanding is that this presents itself almost as this gradual rot in the brain that takes over. Are there any predictors to Alzheimer's if it's not clearly identifiable from the outset?
The field is working, and we're part of members of the NIH consortium on what are called biomarkers, which are predictors of death of neurons, wasting, if you like. So yes, that field is developing. The FDA and other regulatory authorities are focusing very much on this because in early trials, like the ones, we anticipate to do with PMN 310, we may be able to see already early in the trial, well before years of just monitoring clinical results, if we see movement or stabilization of these biomarkers, we may have strong index that our drug is actually doing its work.
Okay. So this lead product candidate that ProMIS Neurosciences has is PMN 310. Can you explain to us firstly, how this will potentially stop Alzheimer's, and really how is this different to what exists on the market at the moment?
Yes, of course I can talk about that. Let me first, though, introduce how we came to discover and create PMN 310, because that's the other major obstacle here. So the first obstacle in addressing the disease was figuring out what's actually driving and causing it, right? So as I mentioned, for over a decade or two, we were wrong. We thought it was plaque. So now we know what to attack. Why is it that ProMIS is able to create therapeutic candidates that selectively target, knock out, neutralize this bad actor form called the oligomer, and the big pharmaceutical companies can't do it? Well, to make better medicines, we need better tools, and the tools we currently use in large pharma companies, I'm very familiar with after 20 plus years in big pharma setting, well, they don't work when it comes to the toxic oligomer. And that's because these toxic oligomers are very challenging to attack, and that's because they're unstable, they're shape-shifters, they're a little pudding-like, they have regions that aren't structured. So the usual techniques that are used, the usual physical techniques that allow you to visualize these things and then find a site you could target on them to knock them out, can't be used. That's why Big Pharma hasn't been able to produce a drug for Alzheimer's disease, or the field hasn't produced a drug for Alzheimer's disease. So it's very difficult to understand exactly where and how to target them. So now that we know what the target is, we have the technology at ProMIS to actually understand where that target is, what it looks like, and so make antibodies, drugs, that are highly selective, neutralizing, knocking out this bad actor target. In essence, acting like with sniper-like precision, if you like, as opposed to sort of a shotgun blast that's, missing the target much of the time. This is really a great breakthrough, and we're quite proud of it. The science is Canadian, by the way, and we've obtained it under a worldwide exclusive license from the University of British Columbia, where our early and our discovery research is conducted.
And so at this point in time, where is the company in its journey through testing, regulation, commercialization?
Boy, that's a long journey, if you like, as I'm sure you know. Where we are right now is, first of all, out of 300 antibody candidates, we selected the very best one. That's PMN 310. And again, that was based on using our unique proprietary discovery platform, as I mentioned just briefly in the previous segment. Compared to other products in development, this is really important so I can position, if you like, our current status. We show the highest degree of binding to toxic oligomers without binding or targeting of any other forms of amyloid, in particular, no engagement of plaque. Why is that important? Because other products that have failed or that are currently in development that target plaque, which we now know is not the right target, but targeted plaque, are associated with a dose-limiting side effect of brain swelling. We call that edema. The problem with that is that the doses that seem to be giving good results with two products that are currently offering encouraging results, these are products from Biogen, the top dose that actually works, but 50% or so of the patients can't tolerate that dose, can't take it, because the drug targets plaque and causes this brain swelling side effect. Of course, because we have no targeting of plaque with our product, we anticipate no opportunity or no risk, if you like, of producing the side effect, which means what? Which means we can go into clinical trials in Alzheimer's patients, giving much higher doses of the medicine, knowing that it's going to where it's exactly needed, the toxic oligomer. It's not wasted on plaque, and it's not causing the side effect, which means there's a real opportunity to have much greater responsiveness or efficacy, as we call it. So we have a pretty aggressive development schedule that I can tell you about if you'd like to know. Yeah. So PMN, sort of three key threads here, if you like, because we're more than just PMN 310 and the company focused on Alzheimer's disease, although that's our lead, and of course the largest indication in, from any way you look at it. So number one, of course, is PMN 310 is currently on track for initial clinical results in Alzheimer's patients around the second half of 2020, near the end of 2020. As I noted before, PMN 310 was chosen the best out of 300 in terms of its high degree of selectivity, unique selectivity for the toxic oligomer. So number one, on track for 2020 initial results. And again, using biomarkers, as I mentioned, these early results may actually indicate that the drug is saving neurons, saving brain cells from being killed. So PMN 310 on track. Number two, we're expanding our portfolio for the identification of targets and novel selective antibody therapeutics for the other diseases, Parkinson's disease, ALS, and in fact other neurodegenerative diseases, including CTE, which is chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or simply put, repetitive head trauma. I'll call it NFL or football disease. And all of these neurodegenerative diseases, and there's other smaller, rarer ones that I haven't mentioned, but the big theme here is that all of these are caused by a protein gone bad, forming into an oligomer, which is a tiny clump of 2, 4, 10, 12 strands of the protein that has a propensity to be toxic, kill neurons, and spread through the brain. So second key point, we're expanding the portfolio on novel antibodies for Parkinson's disease, ALS, potentially other neurodegenerative diseases. Third point, especially for your investors and for ourselves, of course, is that we feel that our programs offer an outstanding opportunity for partnering with big pharma. especially the Parkinson's disease program. It's just a hot area right now for partnering. There have been, several interesting deals done. In this regard, though, for ProMIS, we have several confidential partnering discussions ongoing with large pharma companies. So to sum that up, PMN 310 on track for clinical results 2020, expanding the portfolio into other neurodegenerative diseases beyond Alzheimer's, and partnering opportunities, especially with our Parkinson's disease portfolio.
Okay. When we speak with companies as well who list, they tend to look strategically at what exchange they're going to put themselves on. Was there a particular benefit that made you choose the TSX?
Well, there's several reasons why the TSX is a good starting place, especially for Canadian entrepreneurs, Canadian inventions, Canadian discoveries, which is exactly what this is. As I mentioned, the outstanding science is from the University of British Columbia. So we're quite excited to be on the TSX main board, and it's a good springboard to other venues as well. Biotech in particular, life sciences, but biotech and drug development is really a global opportunity, presents global risks as well. So, we work and collaborate with scientific groups, contract research organizations, other companies in Japan, North America, Europe, all around the world. It's a global business. So ultimately, springboarding from the TSX to other major exchanges, in particular the NASDAQ, is a goal of many Canadian life science companies and certainly ours. But at this stage, we're pleased to be on the TSX. We get good support. I think there are about 43 life science companies on the TSX, and we're very pleased with that start. But we are looking to, offer a much more global footprint, if you like, because the opportunity here and the epidemic is global, and that's the way we need to think.
Okay. And from a business perspective, who are the key personalities across your management and board?
Well, first thing is the senior management team, in addition to myself as CEO, my business partner, Gene Williams, who's an American citizen, a Harvard MBA, just a brilliant guy. He's our executive chairman, and together we sort of design strategy and all the major implementations. On the science side, I'd like to point out our two chief officers. We have a chief scientific officer, Professor Neil Cashman from UBC, who's a world-renowned scientific clinician, if you like, in the field of ALS and neurodegenerative diseases. He supplies all the sort of biological thinking to his partner, who's Professor Stephen Plotkin, also at UBC, who's an associate professor in the Department of Physics. And this is really exciting. I think we're the only biotech company I know of, there might be one somewhere, but the only one I know of that has a chief physics officer. So our chief science officer, biology and science, our chief physics officer, big data, coming together. They've been able to create this outstanding platform I talked about that allows us to visualize these targets and make selective antibodies against them. And by the way, as an aside comment, this is a phenomenon, a trend that's moving throughout medical science over the last 4 or 5 years, where we have expert biologists, scientists, clinicians, and bioscientists coming together with what I'll call sort of big data experts, engineers, bringing to fore the tools that allow us to analyze all this data to create really exciting products as we're doing. So I thought I'd point them out. And lastly, I'd point out also we've just taken on board a new chief medical officer to help drive our Alzheimer's program. He's 17 years of very senior experience at Pfizer, knows the field extremely well, and is, in fact, a key opinion leader in the field. So we have a very strong operational team, including outstanding Canadian science. There are other members of the team, too, who are very good. I just thought I'd point out what's a little special in particular, the partnership between myself, CEO, and the executive chairman, and our chief scientific and chief physics officer, because those are sort of unique fingerprints, if you like, that help identify our company.
Okay, great. So, Elliot, as we finish off for today, can you just summarize again for us the opportunity for investors as you move forward? You talked about potentially partnering with big pharma.
Yes, absolutely. So again, if we work right back to the beginning, which is this epidemic, especially Alzheimer's disease, the other diseases, ALS and Parkinson's disease, are also deadly. But Alzheimer's just trumps them in terms of the epidemiology, right? The prevalence. So It's the largest unmet need in medicine today. There's nothing available. So any product or program that can contribute reasonably to slowing the mental decline, cognitive decline, we call it mental decline, in Alzheimer's disease, has great value. And when I talk about value, I'm a medical doctor, so when I talk about value, the value is multiple levels. There's obviously value to the patients, that's obvious, but there's also value to the caregivers and their families because a lot of the cost and trauma is in the entourage. We all know somebody with Alzheimer's disease. We're not 6 degrees removed from this. We're one or two, right? So massive unmet need, which means huge opportunity, great value, and also value to our economy because if we don't find systems or methods to slow or stop this disease, it will bankrupt our healthcare systems, regardless of how they're structured. There's just no way we can, assume $1.5 trillion of cost related to Alzheimer's disease, let alone the other neurodegenerative diseases. So huge unmet need, great value to create. That's why we believe that if our lead program, PMN 310, and our other programs deliver on their promise, excuse the pun, but deliver on their hopes, we see, very significant value to our shareholders and investors, including ourselves. The management team is, quite heavily invested as well in the program. And then secondly, of course, participation and collaboration with large pharma companies is a very good way to share the burden, share the value, share the costs, and move forward very expeditiously. So that's something on the horizon as well that I'd like to point out to your listeners. But one last thing I just wanted to say is our ultimate goal at ProMIS, our passion, is to develop highly selective therapies that neutralize or knock out these toxic oligomers responsible for Alzheimer's, thereby contributing to this really important value equation from all angles. And that's what I'd like to conclude with today.
Elliot, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Jess.
This has been a production of the Canadian Business Quarterly, a division of Romulus Rising Proprietary Limited. All rights reserved. You can stay up to date with the Canadian Business Quarterly, including our publications, newsletters, and podcasts by visiting www.thecbq.ca and clicking on subscribe.